the Northeast Dairy Producers Association.
Callie Curley Smith, I have been with NEDPA as Membership and Communications Director for about a month.
I'm Mike Ciani. I'm Auditor 1 with the Milk Control and Dairy Services here.
Hi, Heather Torino, Assistant Director for the Division of Milk Control and Dairy Services.
Chris Gravel, I'm the Program Manager for Dairy Services at Ag Markets.
Elizabeth Pila, I'm the economist in Dairy Services here at Ag Markets.
Antonia Giuliano, Senior Policy Advisor here at Ag Markets.
Christine Broder, I am a Senior Director at DFA Risk Management out of the Syracuse office.
Jim Davenport, Agrimark member, voting representative, Hudson Valley Fresh managing partner, and didn't milk cows this morning, but still milking. In Ankendale, New York, so I kind of cover the whole gamut.
Hi, everybody. Nicole Martin, Assistant Research Professor in Dairy Foods and Microbiology at Cornell University, Director of the Milk Quality Improvement Program, and as of a month ago, Director of the Cornell Dairy Foods Center.
And good afternoon, Max Finberg, lead government affairs with Giovanni.
Chris Lawton, Farm Credit East, Director of Knowledge Exchange.
Katie Howard, Deputy Commissioner here at the department. I oversee the Division of Milk Control and Dairy Services, Food Safety Inspection, and our food lab. We will be joined later by Commissioner Ball. He's just attending a few other meetings at the moment, so he will come in for probably the latter half of our meeting. But I do know that we also have folks on the line.
Sure. Want me to call them up? Okay. So virtual friends, if you can unmute yourself, we'll start at the top alphabetically by first name. Amy, are you able to unmute and introduce yourself? Oh. Or Amy, no. I unmute you.
Thank you. Amy Galindo, Cayuga Marketing, Cayuga Milk Ingredients. I'm CFO here.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Alex. Alex, we're not able to hear you. Can you try again?
Oh, sure. Alex Walsh, Executive Director for Northeast Dairy Foods and Suppliers Associations.
Awesome. Thank you. Andy.
Agricultural economics from Cornell University.
Thank you. Can you just repeat that, Andy? We didn't catch the first part of your introduction.
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yes, loud and clear.
I feel like the commercial. Yeah, this is Andy Novakovich, Professor Emeritus of Agricultural Economics at Cornell University.
Thank you. Brian. Can you try again, Brian?
Oh, sorry. I came over with the meetings being recorded when it got to me. Brian Sharp, WXXI, Public Media and Broadcaster.
Thank you. Christopher. Oh.
Hello, Chris Temna, Milford, New York. I'm in Central New York. I'm also a certified organic and grass-fed dairy farmer.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's see. Next, we have Doug.
Doug Shalmanine, dairyman from Northern New York.
Thank you, Doug. Ed. Can you try again, Ed?
Yes, DFA alumni and New York State Milk Promotion alumni.
Thank you so much. See that? Hold on, Gina, you're up next, but I'm gonna see if Elizabeth's able to unmute you.
She's not on.
She's not. Okay, gotcha. Okay. No worries. Let's see, John, you're up next. Can you try again, John?
Oh, John Marcucci, Assistant Market Administrator, Federal Order 1, Northeast Marketing Area.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Just got 2 more here, or 3 more. Let's see, we got him. Won't let me unmute. There we go. Michael.
Mike Barnes, Agrimark Director and Dairy Producer.
Thank you. Steven. We got 2 Stevens. I'm sorry. Steve with Terzo.
Steve Terzo, American Dairy Association Northeast, Director of Business Development, sitting in for John Chrisman, our CEO today. Thank you.
Thank you. And the other Steven, looks like you're on. There you go. Go ahead.
Okay. Steve Quadros, Assistant Market Administrator, Federal Order 1, based in Boston.
Okay. All right. That concludes our virtual attendees. Thanks for your patience there. WebEx is always fun with mute and unmute. I'll turn it back to you, Katie and Chris.
Sounds good. So I'll just say a couple words and then I will turn it right over to Chris. But just to say thank you again. Really, it's the folks that are around the table that make my job really quite a bit of fun. With a lot of the dairy expansion happening right now, it's a pretty exciting time to be part of the dairy community. So really excited to hear folks' update today. I know we're going to kind of dive right into the economic outlook, but also really excited for our conversation in a little while, really to talk about sustainability, looking at our dairy community today and what we're going to need going forward. So with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, so it's pretty exciting time to be in New York Dairy with all the new things that are happening in the state. I don't know though if the farmers are going to be as happy this next year with the prices as they have been recently though, looking at the markets. So we're going to go in order here so Christine is first.
All right, rock on.
I love your attitude. I love it.
Well, I hope you feel that way.
Well, you just keep up the
finish my outlook, because as Chris sort of alluded to, 2026, I'm going to stand, sorry, I do a little better standing. 2026 is, shaping up to be a little bit interesting. So let's see here. I'll give you, perhaps I should do a teeny bit of introduction for those of you that I don't know, which is not many of you. I've been with DFA and actually Dairy Lead before that since 2008. Joined the risk management team in 2011, worked with Ed Gallagher for all of that time until he retired last year. And so now have the responsibility of running all of DFA's farm owner facing forward contracting and risk management programs. And so that's kind of where my background is. We spend a lot of time talking to farms all across the country. So some of what I brought today is a little bit more national in scope. And I'll look to you guys just to kind of help fill me in on any of my more Northeast specific stuff that's important. I did have an opportunity to catch up with Catherine Durand briefly. There's a couple points that she asked to make sure that I make, so I will make those as well. Just to kind of start off, 2025 was a pretty good year for milk prices. Kind of a messy slide, but you can see that each of those colors represents one of DFA's 7 areas, so it kind of gives you an idea across the country of how prices stack up. That light blue line, kind of the second one, that's Northeast prices. We tend to be about the second best price, and that was again the case here in 2025. What you can see going into 2026 is things look very different for farmers all across the country, and the Northeast is certainly no different. A lot of this stuff is what I want to talk about. As we go into 2026, we got to remember that markets are very supply driven right now. A lot of what's happening is all about supply. We're going to look at that. We're going to talk a little bit more specifically about cream, and then kind of how some of the expansion, particularly in the cheese market, is impacting what expectations are into 2026. I think this gives you a little bit more localized perspective. So this is a forecast that we put together. It's futures-based. It looks at the Boston-based blend price. And it takes an estimate of like average component values and adds that back on top. So each of those bars represent 1 month. The blue bars would be 25, the reds would be 26. You're looking at about a $3.20 difference on average between the average of 2025 and the average of 2026 as markets stack up right now. Obviously, you can see that the market has some optimism for the second half of the year. We'll talk a little bit about sort of what that looks like or what could drive that. And then this again looks at those prices across the country as a reference point. So the big storyline that has had everybody captive, right, is just that this has been a really big change in markets since really about like September. We saw the Class 3 and Class 4 futures markets had held pretty steady for 2026 for quite a while, and then really quickly capped off really dramatic declines here. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between 3s and 4s because that has a bigger impact with some of the changes in federal order, and talk about that too. I also I wanted to bring this in here a little bit. So one of the it's a supply-driven problem, right? Markets have declined primarily because milk supply has been really heavy. We're going to look at those numbers. One thing that we're trying to get a handle on is what is the response from the farm side of how they're going to react to these sort of lower prices. And I know this is a little bit hard to read, but we did a producer survey recently and we asked all of our farm owners, like, hey, what would it take for you to start calling your herd? What's the milk price that's required in order to see some sort of big call response? And the reason we're asking this question is because the market's changed a lot since the last time we had a bit of a downturn. You've got beef on dairy, which is supporting revenues in a really different way. You've got a whole lot of stuff. The market consolidation is considered. Just the industry dynamics are different. And so we wanted to kind of recheck what that number would be. And 2/3 of our producers said it's going to be like $14 or $15 gross prices. So for that to be a gross price, you're talking about 13-inch Class 3, which we're still a ways away from. And I think that that's an important thing just for us to keep in mind as we look into 2026 of how things could continue to move. Our farm owners were also relatively split on whether or not the dairy herd is going to start shrinking over the next 6 months. So I'm going to show you some data, and I think that that is a really interesting point because of the fact that, you know, the herd is just really significantly high. October U.S. milk production was up 3.7% year over year. This was the 5th straight month of 3+% growth. And you can see here, this chart, the darker the blue, the higher the growth rate, and the reds are your declines. So really, growth is prevalent everywhere, right? It's very universal. I think at the beginning of the year, we would have expected to see growth in some of these areas where there was planned expansions in capacity, right? Farms were preparing for that, but it sort of got a lot more general than the market was anticipating. The herd dropped a little bit in the October report, but it's still sitting at a very high number. We're at 9.57 is the herd right now, and this just chart goes back to 2014. So you can see that that's significantly higher than where we've been holding for quite a while. This, I think, is one of the biggest question marks that we get is producers trying to figure out, well, where did all these cows come from? And you know, you all have a pretty good pulse on this too, but we would say it's probably two things. One, because of that really great revenue that you're able to generate from your calves, your day olds, there's a lot of people that are keeping cows in the herd for a lot longer. 5th, 6th lactation cows is not uncommon, which was crazy to think of several years ago, right? So that has changed the picture quite a bit. I also think that we potentially as an industry maybe we underestimated how much growth was already planned, especially out west where some of these big cheese plants were going in line, that people have known that that growth was coming and have been making their own decisions and building their own herds kind of along with that. And so, yes, it was very difficult early in the year to find heifers, but that didn't necessarily mean they didn't exist. They were just, they were there, they were just planned to go with that sort of expansion for those specific farms. So those are kind of two things that have driven what has really changed here. And as we talked a little bit about with the calling response, it's kind of a question mark of really where this goes. You know, some of the DFA people, when we were forecasting it, we don't think it really drops all that much until you get maybe into July or so. Maybe that's the time where we start to see some big change in cow numbers. It is a big indicator in my mind. If we see cow numbers dropping faster, that would support price rallies a little bit sooner. So that's a big one to keep your eye on. And this is just a little bit of a chart that looks at dairy cow slaughter activities. So it's a little bit of an eye chart, but the blue line there would be in 2024 cow slaughter, the reds would be in 25. And so you can just see that compared to like the 5-year average. In 25, we spent most of the year significantly under 2024 cull rates. And as we've gotten kind of recently, we've now back almost in parity to up a little bit. Overall, still less cows going to slaughter than we had in 24, but it certainly has accelerated here recently. And then I think the other storyline that's important to talk about is not just the straight up milk supply growth of 3.7%, but that we're making significantly more components. I know this is another storyline that a lot of people are following, but if you take the actual solids in the milk, it's adding another percent to that headline number. So really the market is just trying to recalibrate itself with all these additional solids. And this has had particular impact on the butter markets and the class 4 markets. That's really where a lot of that pressure has come into play. This again just kind of looks at the fact that we don't really think this change in milk components and the increasing components that you're seeing in milk, that's not going away. I think this is something that the industry will continue to do. There is, you know, depending on who you talk to, some farms would say that we'll see a little bit of a pullback as things get a little bit tighter on the farm. Maybe they make subtle changes in rations and things like that to pull some of the supplements out. But overall, this is the result of just generations of really good breeding that's not going anywhere. So I think it's something we need to just continue to recalibrate for. And I think what's the biggest storyline that is sort of being untalked about is how fast milk supply is growing globally. Again, a little bit of an eye chart here, but each of those colors on the bar represents a major exporting region. And so what you want to look at the United States is in the light blue, but the European Union is in the dark blue, and their milk production has been significantly higher recently. Now they're coming back after some herd health issues last year, but still posting like 7-8% growth rates in places like France and Germany, which is just really changing the name of the game here in the global marketplace. We know that in the US, the way that our pricing system is set up, it's all kind of predicated on the prices for those commodities, right? At the end of the day, cheese and butter, non-vegetarian milk and dry whey are what's driving what's in producer milk checks. And that has really been the story here as we follow these prices have just declined into levels that we haven't seen in years and years. You know, I think when we compare 2026 expectations, we keep going back to a 2021 comparison. It's not perfect, but it feels like that's some of the similarities with the market there. And for those of you that remember 2021, it wasn't a great year. It was a tough year. There were some big challenges, and I think that is something that we are preparing producers for. So far, the reason that the global milk production piece is so significant for us today is because exports have been a huge help for milk pricing here in 2025. We've moved record numbers of exports throughout the year in cheese, but also in butter. The butter chart is an interesting one to look at. Don't get too excited. Yes, we had huge growth rates. That red line represents what we've moved in 2025, but still a relatively small amount of overall product. Still, it's a good trend. I think something that we're excited about, that cheese, again, we've been able to move a lot of that, but a lot of the reason for that is because our pricing has been competitive. Unfortunately, the export space largely continues to be a price-driven market. When you have the best price in town, you're going to be able to move that product. And what this chart looks at here is the blue line represents the European mozzarella price, and the red line represents the US cash block cheese price. And for most of 2025, that second half of the chart, our price has been below the European price. And so we were able to move into those markets and move a lot of that product in a way that was obviously supportive for our prices here. However, what you can see very recently is that European price has fallen off dramatically. So is the US price, but not quite to the same degree. So we've lost a little bit of our global competitiveness. And I think that that's something that we have a concern on for where all of this new cheese capacity now where does it go in 2026? Again, when we compare it back to 2021, this was the last time that we had those global price alignment, and you can just see that this is our export numbers. So cheese exports kind of stagnated in 2021. So if things are to repeat themselves, again, the market changes all the time. It's hard to use historical gauges, but we could see another similar trend here in 2026. I think the bright spot in the dairy market, and something that I did really want to touch on, is this whey complex overall, protein more generally, right? You all work for dairy companies, you know exactly how important this trend is. But I think the whey market has done a nice job of staying stronger and hitting new highs as we try to find new ways to move that protein product, and dairy is a perfect protein to hit a lot of those needs. So this is continuing to be a very positive thing in the market. You're also going to see a lot of new investment around these types of protein products and things like that. Again, you're all more familiar with that than I am, but. Okay, so I talked a little bit about the federal order changes that went into place in 2025. And so one of the most significant ones for our dairy producers here in the Northeast is that they've changed back to a higher of mover. And so it becomes important now to kind of watch between what's happening on the class 3 and the class 4 markets. As you can see here, it's not a very wide spread, but class 3 is expected to be the higher of as futures markets sit right now into 2026. And so that's going to drive that 30-ish% of the milk that goes into class 1. Just be aware of that. Watch your cheese and your dry whey markets as your drivers of class 3. I don't know that we need to spend a lot of time on this, but producers are in the midst right now of making milk that'll have a different standard component test than ever has before. Again, this is just an educational point. I think it's important for people to react to the fact that there's more dollars now in those announced class prices because of that increased standard test. So just from a comparison, keep that in mind a little bit. You'll notice that I didn't have a lot of inventory data here because we haven't had inventory data in a really long time. So none of it is really all that valid. But for Christmas, USDA is giving us 3 inventory reports on December 23rd. So we will have lots of data to go through at that point. And I think in general, though, the market really has sort of been challenged by this delay of data, right? You all are well aware of this. Exports are something that we've been struggling to get our hands on, even some of the slaughter data, things like that. So it'll be nice to get caught up. Watch that December 23rd. That is going to be a very interesting day. 3 months in a row of inventory reports. Just a couple more words on profitability more generally on dairies is that overall feed inputs have been a little bit less expensive here through 2025, are expected to stay that way into 2026. I would say that this is somewhat regional, so just be aware, right? Up here in the Northeast, you are well aware of this, that we had a pretty tough growing season. And so there's a lot more feed coming into the area, just at a little bit of a higher price rate. So some of the things where we're looking at margin-based protection, it's not going to feel the same for our Northeast farms as maybe it has in the past. So something to be aware of there. Goes along well with our dairy margin coverage. So this is another, as I believe you all know, the FSA office offers this program for dairy producers. This looks at kind of where we've been. That red bar represents the 950 margin level, which is the maximum that people can buy up to, and hopefully the level that all producers choose to, despite I know that they don't. And then $4 would be kind of the minimum. And what you could see is for 2025, really not a whole lot of payouts at this point. Current expectations maybe would have some payouts of a very small degree in November and December. But 2026, you are expected, as everything stands right now, to see some more payouts. So this program will be increasingly important whenever they open enrollment for it for 2026. So do keep an eye on that. I think one thing that Catherine mentioned that she's hearing more of is that farms have frustration with this program, especially in the Northeast right now. And I think some of that is driven by the fact, like I said, that they just had a really poor growing season. Their feed costs are a little bit out of alignment with some other regions of the country. And so while this program isn't paying off, it feels like maybe it should for some of our farms. So that's a little bit of frustration that's coming in. I also think in general that DMC was subject to some of the other shutdown things that went on. We just had months where we didn't have any announcements at all. I think people kind of forgot that the program was there. They did yesterday release the September and October margin numbers for DMC, so we do finally have those. And then November, again, if there's a payout, we'll know about that at the end of this month. It's a little bit delayed. The price impact was felt on farms probably starting in October, and the earliest DMC support maybe now come in January. So a little bit of frustration there from farms.
Was the October number below 950?
It was not.
It wasn't? No kidding. Okay.
No.
I thought it might be a few cents below.
It was actually, I think it was 10.50.
Oh, wow.
It was a good
No
dollar
kidding.
above. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
sure as hell will be below in November, at least looking at my milk check.
Yeah, that's everything.
Pay mailbox price is $16.45 for high quality for free milk.
In
food,
November.
protein, yeah, for initial payment.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. So one other, the kind of final piece of the profitability picture is this beef revenue. It is an important thing to consider. And I know not every farm is doing this in the same way. So, you know, you got to kind of temper your expectations a little bit. But this is a little bit of a messy chart. But what we're attempting to show here is we're looking at, since 2018, kind of what the makeup of income for our Northeast area farms has been. And that blue section of the bar represents what our sort of feed index is. Again, this is national based. It's not perfect for any individual farm, but it gives you an idea of about how much of that price is used up to pay feed. The red would represent just kind of the overall blend price. So at Boston, what the milk price averaged. You can see that in 2025, it was about $19.74. $8.25 of that was used to pay feed, but then the rest of that was gravy. And it was a little bit, you know, a little bit under what we had in 2024 and definitely under 2022, which was the last like great year. The green section of these bars now represents the above standard component tests that goes on top of that milk. So everybody, not everybody, but producers broadly are making much above 3.5 fat, right? And so there's significant value there. And you can see that over the past several years, that green value, that above standard component test has added quite a bit to the overall profitability picture. Going into 2026, it's down a little bit. And that's twofold. One is because more of the standard test is now in the announced price. And two is because the overall component prices for butter, fat, and protein are driven off of butter and cheese, which are just a little bit lower. So your incremental value will be down a little bit comparatively. And then the last piece is really this beef revenue. And really probably in 2025, we had farms telling us that they were generating up to $4 a hundredweight of additional revenue in beef. Maybe it averaged closer to $2. The beef markets have been under a little bit of pressure lately. So we're saying maybe it's going to be closer to, you know, $2, $1.50 or so in 2026. Still important, still valuable, still makes kind of the overall profitability picture look a little bit better, but definitely under a little bit of pressure there. This was just a little bit about just cattle markets more generally, really acknowledging that even though that price has fallen somewhat recently, there is still a significant amount of value in the cattle market. So I think people will continue to utilize that and benefit from that. And then just finally that there is, I don't really want to do a cattle market update, but there are some new programs for those of you that are working directly with dairy producers and are looking for ways to support them. The LRP program is, you know, it's not perfect, but it provides that protection for that sort of day-old black calf. in a way that a lot of our producers have taken advantage of, especially in light of the milk price situation. Where is there revenue that I can protect for my farm and try to take advantage of that? And so I do encourage you guys to take a look at that. That is what I brought. I'm gonna double check my notes and make sure I made all the points that Catherine wanted me to make. But I'll happily take any questions that anybody has either. I know I did it sort of quickly.
I'll just chime in quickly just to remind our virtual friends, I put this in the chat as well, but this meeting is on moderated unmute mode. So what that means to our virtual attendees is that either Elizabeth or I need to unmute you. So if you could use the raise your hand feature on WebEx, and we'll be able to unmute you if you have a question or a comment.
Did anybody figure on the rebound from Idaho and California with HPATH? It seems like everybody missed that was gonna happen, because the word we got was that it knocked the heck out of a pregnant cow. You had to dry her off or beef her, but more than likely she would come back full force next lactation. And I just didn't see much about that in the magazines and everything. But you look at the size of the production in California and how they got hammered. I mean, it does make sense that they're way up, you know?
Yeah.
In New York, I think it's the anticipation of all these new plants opening up that people have geared up, you know? But yeah, it was, it shouldn't have been such a surprise that milk was gonna bounce back on those states with HPATH.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think one thing that we saw specifically out of California was like, I think we maybe knew that it would bounce back at some point. It came more quickly than we thought. And it also, they had like, the people I talked to out of California, they had like the world's perfect summer. It was cool the whole time. They didn't get that crazy hot heat. So when you kind of combine that all together, it's like the perfect storm of situations, the recovery from and the weather. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask what I think is probably going to be on the mind of a lot of New York dairy producers. We've all been popping the champagne corks about all the new expanded production capacity, processing capacity that's occurring in New York, yet the average milk price is going to go down by more than $3 next year. Why isn't or is all this expanded processing capacity helping milk prices at all?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And I think one thing that I've been talking to my producers in the Northeast about is like, this is a little bit of a tough dynamic, because in the Northeast overall, there's still a need for milk growth in the Northeast overall. And so the signals that we're getting, the way that the milk pricing system works, right, all based on this cheese and butter prices, is the signals that you're getting reflect the national trends, that there's just too much milk nationally. And that's not exactly the case here. And it's gonna just be a little bit tough to mention that. I think over time, the expansion in the Northeast gives the opportunity for markets to get a little bit more competitive, maybe you get some over premiums back. Like there's a way that some of those dollars flow back in to try to help mitigate some of what's happening nationally. I don't see that in 2026. That takes a little time to manifest itself. I don't know what your perspectives would be on that, Chris. I mean,
I hear the grumbling and the across the countryside.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, when's you guys' plan gonna be up?
Up for a little bit.
Yeah, a lot of it hasn't come online yet.
When that comes online,
that's true too.
I think that extra milk that's being made now will be soaked up. And much to Shabani's goodwill, good luck, because if we didn't have this push now to increase production, when they came in, there's gonna be milk is gonna be sucked in from, I don't know from where, west and south. I mean, you know, down south, they're getting no milk from us, you know, for a while. You know, right, Chris? I mean, that's sort of what is going to happen. Milk flows where it's needed.
Well, historically, out of the 16 billion pounds produced in New York State, about 4 have been leaving the state.
Yeah.
Probably less of it leaves the state. That seems like a logical outcome, right? So that means opportunities for other farmers to supply the Southeast, because the Southeast is a big deficit area and will continue to be, right? You know, you're right.
Okay. Well, I'm thinking right.
Yeah, with whole milk set to go back into schools, that'll mean less cream available. What is that gonna look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. We were kind of tossing around some of those numbers this morning. So it does, I'm actually gonna cheat and look at my numbers. So it does have, because I just got them, It does have an impact. I think there's some questions still around, like, maybe you guys will know this better than I do, but not all farms are now automatically gonna buy whole milk, right? So you still got some, like, there's a general shift that has to come with it. But kind of like, all right, here's some numbers, right? If you're saying that current milk offerings are split between skim and 1%, and you hold the same adoption levels that go to whole, it would boost butterfat demand by 15 million, up to 46 million pounds. So kind of like a 1% of additional growth of butterfat, which certainly would help the market quite a bit. I think the question marks just really come down to the fact of like, how quick can we shift the processing and how quick are schools able to kind of get that in, and what decisions are students making? Because I have a 9-year-old and who the heck knows what he's going to do. So a little bit, there's some of that goes in there. But overall, it tightens it up. It doesn't really change the milk supply situation, but it does move more of that cream, which would have been a big help this year for sure.
And with our schools that we have talked, when we did the bidding, we mentioned that, think about this, it may happen, that you have the option, it's an option, it's not mandatory. You can go back to whole milk. And I guess we're just gonna find out, food service directors, what they think. I think we're gonna push to get some whole milk in there and get like a trial run and see if the kids like it more. Because they're gonna have to pay a little more because the skim milk, that even though cream's not worth anything anymore, it's still worth something. And if we end up, if we have to go in there, we have to get a little something for the cream, the extra cream that's in that milk. But I just think it'll be interesting, but we don't do the bidding thing till next, May, June. But I think we can put this, I'm sure it's gonna get signed into law. I don't know how it couldn't. But I think by next year, we're gonna know what, well, I don't know. I mean, everything's nuts, but still. If it's unanimous in both the House and the Senate, unanimous in the Senate, almost that way in the House, I can't imagine what kind of stuff they'd have to be smoking in the White House not to sign it. But I think we'll find out. I think the idea is kids will drink more of it, and I'd love to see them just all whole milk and do away with the friggin' chocolate and all that sugar. I would think great, but I don't think it's gonna happen. That's all we had when we were kids, and a Coke bottle was 7 ounces, not gallons. So anyway, okay, that's it.
The only other point that I neglected to make that I wanted to is just with regard to negative PPDs. So you would have seen in November, the Boston PPD was announced at 17 cents, which means that in a lot of regions you did have negative PPDs in producer checks. There's not an expectation for that to happen more broadly really in 2026, but just another thing that you might be hearing. Kevin wanted to make a point, right, that the strong class 2 utilization in the Northeast sort of works against us a little bit because that is a class 4 based pricing. And so when 4 is super, super low, it's bringing that low value into the class 2, which does, even though overall the changes for federal orders should make PPDs less negative over time, the Northeast still has a lot of that class 2 utilization just to contend with. Just be a little bit thoughtful about that too. I've gone over my time. Oh, yeah.
I was gonna say, if you could speak to, or maybe somebody else in the room could add, Chris talked about all the capacity. And so once this capacity comes on, we make this product. What are folks feeling on, someone still has to buy it at the end, the consumer, right? How are we bullish on that going forward? Like, or is this product are we still gonna end up with a lot of product? We're trying to push on consumers at low prices. We still end up in the federal order system with a low, wholesale price and so forth. Any thoughts from your folks or, Giovanni?
We are.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we're seeing that.
So we're ranking on actually.
I don't know if as this stuff comes on, is it going, do you feel there's gonna be a matched or a closely matched demand with that product coming on? Or is it gonna be a little bit of get the, consumers, so is it gonna delay the price recovery bit at all, in your opinion, based on consumer demand?
Mm-hmm. It'll be a little tricky. It won't be synchronized perfectly. Again, we're not ready yet, but when we're there, all told, we're looking at 5% of the whole US milk supply. So we're not doing that because nobody's buying it.
And I would say that tracks on our side too,
Okay.
right? We can't keep things on shelves or on
No.
location. We gotta come off that. And so, yeah, we're bullish that way for obvious
You got
reasons.
another plan coming up.
Yeah. But I think that, but we also recognize, particularly in the Northeast, I think with all the investment, we're also not the only players anymore in either UFM or some of these high protein products. So how the market saturation may also impact the demand. Will it level out? Will it, pay for a little bit and then recover? I think that still remains. Well, those are discussions that I think work well, as all dairy processors are. I think is how we meet these protein asks, maybe some other consumer asks, while also trying to make multi-million-dollar investments to match up every time, right? So.
Yeah, my thing is we're just like hanging on the hopes of the capacity coming, and that's what we said, popping the corks, and we're all happy, and that's super dynamic and great news for us. And then we're like, I was just worried, not worried, but like, okay, is there gonna be maybe additional, a little wait while, all of a sudden we have a capacity, is there an immediate response? Like, are the consumers are there waiting for it, or is it gonna be a market that develops a little bit, and then we've got there? So that was so thanks for.
More the former. One of the worries would be this dip now of 26 into 27. Are farmers going to be so squeezed that we're not ready for 28?
Right, and I was, when you were talking about, the culling might happen in the middle of the, next year, and I'm like, oh wait, we were just making some supply for everybody here to start making some product, just that we start culling, so there's a lot of timing involved in some of this that I'm looking at.
And it'll be regional to a certain degree too, right? There's nothing to say that the farmers must have to be from the Northeast. Producers I talk to overall, I'm not saying that this isn't challenging right now, and it's not expected to be challenges, but they sort of are more long-term focused here in the Northeast. There's a lot of reason to stick through it this time. It's a little bit different in some other areas. The only thing that I would say, just as like kind of a broad frame on your point about consumer demand more generally, is that really in 2025, the issue of milk prices coming down over the year, it really wasn't demand driven on the domestic side. Retail demand was pretty steady, like domestic demand. It's all kind of moving, particularly protein is growing, right? There's all sorts of good trends there. It's just really a matter of the milk came on a little bit faster than we were ready for it on. So I think if those retail trends continue, there's reason to find ways to continue to move that product, for sure.
No, I also think about, protein's king right now, and everything, it's like, oh, I can get everything with 30%, 30 grams of protein, 40 grams of protein, 50 grams of protein. And I hear some people that, call my office and they're like, what are we gonna do with all the butterfat? What are we gonna do? That milk that supplies that protein, it's still coming with all this butterfat. So, and then you've got these prices, and we talk about PPDs, and, if your cheese price and your butter price are divergent, or, butter being down, that's somewhat driving that, less value in the, federal order pricing with the PPD. So, it's another dynamic. Somebody at one co-op, I won't mention the name, because I don't want to call them out. It's kind of a funny comment though. He's like, oh, you're going to, can you tell those guys to put a butter plant in this place, right between here and there? So you can I'm like, oh, well, you can tell them that, but, that was, so there is some thought on, geez, what's going to happen with that? How's that going to play into the whole overall price for the farmer? I mean, protein, that demand can go up and up, and it may be balanced with, I don't know, it may be balanced with what we see on the butter side, and powder and so forth.
Yeah. And maybe the answer is export, right? We've not historically, as a U.S. market, done a great job exporting butter. Like, we don't make the butter that people want globally. And I think there's been some trends in the industry to sort of shift that and try to find ways to supply that market, because there's global demand there that we could absolutely find a way to tap into. Yeah.
Yeah, you showed, it was that cheese whether we were catching up to the, it's like we waited a little bit and then like, oh, we better go down here.
I mean, the butterfat price has an inverse effect on the protein price, so that
Sorry that crazy.
Yes, I'm interested in protein breakfast.
Thank you.
All right, yeah.
No, thanks.
Thank you.
Good job. I'm assuming Jody's not.
I wasn't
It
able to
says
catch up with
tentative.
Jody.
I just wanted to give Jody a chance if she had anything to say. I'm assuming that, Christine, you got Catherine's remarks, so.
I did, but
So,
yeah.
nice job. And, just, Jody's not on, that's fine. We've kind of already moved.
Jody,
Oh, she's
Jody,
there, okay.
Jody did join after our
Right.
introductions. Jody, I just unmuted you if you want to just chime in briefly here.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I think Christine did a really great job of summing up kind of what I would have indicated around the markets as well. I did share in the chat with Elizabeth that as you all were discussing the Whole Milk for Healthy Kids Act, just a reminder that it will take some time for implementation. So that isn't even if the resident signed it tomorrow, the option won't be there tomorrow. There will be a lead time and work to be done to making that option available for schools. So certainly very exciting times though, and we're excited to be able to see this come to fruition. I know it's been a passion project for the industry and for dairy farmers in particular. So thanks, Christine. Sorry we weren't able to connect, but you did a great job. Thank you.
Thanks, Jody. And Gina, I am going to unmute you now and see if we can get your introduction. Gina, are you there? All right, we're still experiencing some audio difficulties with Gina, but Gina is with DFA, Director of Marketing?
Communications.
Director of Communications, perfect. So Gina is with us, and I'm sorry, Gina, we're running into some audio difficulties with you. But that wraps up Economic Outlook, and I'll pass it back over maybe to either Katie or Chris to open up our federal and state policy discussion. But just open up for group discussion.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've kind of already started that.
Yes,
right?
we did.
So the Whole Milk for Healthy Kids, and so that's one of the issues, the federal milk marketing order reform. I don't, do we want to talk more about the whole milk for, I mean, I'm certainly not an expert on that, but if anybody here is, I have a question, which is my understanding that one of the impediments of the whole milk was the calorie limits on school meals. So how does that get worked around? Does anybody know? In this case?
I know we
Because
have-
there are caloric limits, right? And the skim milk is how many calories less? 45 calories less in the cup or something like that? And so it was significant enough that it was a problem for balancing.
Well, I would assume, I don't know, I can't remember what it is, but the low-fat or skimmed chocolate milk, even though we had to lower the added sugar, we just cut down the amount of syrup that we put into the milk, so the milk was a little less dark. And another dairy we know of, they just pulled the added sugar out, period, and the little kids have sweet teeth, and they did not like the bitterness of the milk. But I would like to think that the whole milk, 3.25%, the calories wouldn't be too much worse than a sweetened chocolate, and maybe for the health of the kids, these schools may want to just go with more whole milk and,
well,
I don't know.
I think you're probably right, Jim, in fact that, all nutrients are not created equal, right?
Yeah.
And fat has other benefits like,
Oh, nervous system development is huge.
But, and this is kind of an imperfect problem that we've had, right, with school lunches, is you put limits like that on, they're just
Yeah.
kind of broad limits. They're not considering the underlying nutrients. And I just wondered if there was anything in the legislation that would help, deal with that, because there's something, there's
Yeah.
higher quality calories and lower quality
Yeah,
calories, right?
Well, we
So-
gotta eat more kale, and then you have to worry about calories.
Well, I do think it will go hand in hand with the dietary guidelines that will be announced in January, right? And the consideration around saturated fat, again, Max, you chime in here too. That the adjustment and the embracing of saturated fat now, particularly from animal products, hopefully, I think as this ideally gets signed on by the end of the month, then DGA is getting announced ideally in January. I think we'll see kind of a curtail with that from a federal policy standpoint that may address less the caloric issue, but more of the saturated fat piece. That I understood this was a little bit more of a hang up.
And yeah, with protein, there was there still is some of the conversation around whether dairy maintains its own category or gets lumped into the larger protein bucket as they reinstitute the food pyramid. And that's an ongoing conversation as HHS has the pen, but USDA has a lot more oomph. So,
Is that guidelines panel, have they been established yet? Or
oh, it's already done. It's
the people that are involved with that? Okay.
Yep. And again, every 5 years it switches. HHS had the lead this time round, and they're blaming it on the shutdown, but a lot of the behind the scenes back and forth and give and take is one of the reasons why it's not done yet.
We do have a comment from Andy. Andy, you're unmuted. Go ahead.
All right, can everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
Yes. So as was already noted, we may have new dietary guidelines. Hard to say exactly when and what those will be. But in point of fact, this bill that would allow whole milk to be served in schools was conceptualized actually a number of years ago. And the folks that thought of this understood that this would have an effect not only on the caloric requirement, but also on the separate fat requirement and the separate saturated fat requirement. And so part of this legislation exempts milk from the caloric, fat, and saturated fat requirement totals. So they are off the books. They're a free throw. How schools will respond to that, and the choices that they'll make with respect to adopting whole milk, of course, continues to be a school board and community question. But in terms of being eligible for this school lunch subsidies, the fat content of milk is exempt from those three items, which either one of them would have been an impediment to adopting it without that.
Thank you, Andy.
Great, thanks. Brian, did you want to, I mean, we've talked a little bit in the past, but now we have all of the, well, we have the Federal Milk Marketing Order modernization reforms are in place, but there's still, what, did you want to say anything about that at all? And then maybe I was going to ask Andy if you'd talk a little bit about the survey stuff, unless you want to.
I think as far as the cost survey.
Yeah, because I know Andy has some knowledge on that.
Working on that, and actually John Marcucci and Steve Watchers online have been part of those. There's been some meetings with some of the plants that can maybe update on that. But yeah, the December the reference components portion of the federal marketing order price changes in that decision. That was part of our advanced price that we just put out. And that's the final piece of the puzzle as far as, all of those price changes that, came forth. So, there's been a lot of talk about when Packy talked about the higher of, that was a big piece for some folks. And, Josh and, I talked like, oh, the prices are far apart. So the higher of is benefiting relative to what it used to be an average of. But then of course there's the ESL portion that's priced a little bit differently. Really that's, there's not too much more to say about that than, I think unless someone has a question about, but that's all been enacted at this point. From a federal order standpoint, I think we've, what we're seeing a little bit in addition to that, we discussed prices. We've been dealing a little bit with some, pooling provision type challenges a bit with, performance on the market type issues, these types of things. How do I, depending on what people have source for getting class one, they're going to move certain milk to class one to perform the market, be part of the pool. So there's been a little bit of challenge with that. And so in the House we've been dealing, there's been some strain on that with, some maybe smaller costs maybe and different folks associated with pool. But that's been, that's kind of where things are right now. You did, stole some thunder with our negative PPD. That's fine. That's not thunder I like to bring up a lot, but it's a complex and complicated discussion to explain that to people. And you're right. I mean, on one hand, we had I was just saying to Steve and John earlier, like, oh yeah, we're the only order with a positive PPD at our pricing zone, but we don't have too many plants in that zone. Everything else is actually being priced in a negative PPD zone. So, a lot of it does go to this, the fact that the butter, the class 4 prices come down, it brings that class 2 with it, as you mentioned. So those things come down, and it's just this idea that our pool value, we didn't generate enough, in the pool at the level we pay those components on at the class 3. So I'm sure we're getting ready to explain that to, when that happens, we get a lot more calls from producers and other folks like, what does this mean? Humorously, I've been told I should go to prison because of that, lots of things. I'm like, oh geez, multiple times, but I'm still Gary with that boatload of money that I keep stealing from the, but joking aside, it is a complex issue, and if anybody here, comes into producers that want explanation, either, the co-ops or whatever, you can even say, you're certainly welcome to, call us. We're planning on putting something in our bulletin that we put out explaining that, yeah, some folks might have seen this and kind of going over the dynamic a little bit, so this month, so if you're looking for that. But we're always more than happy to help producers understand that as best they can. They farm and we try to explain. So.
A whole bunch of it's strictly $2.95 butterfat price in January and $150 something now. That's like most of it, right?
Yeah, well, that's exact. That's the dynamic that's done it to.
It's pretty obvious the fat we were trying to make so hard and doing such a good job producing isn't worth anything.
Right. Chris and I were talking about, we've been some articles talking about some things and, with, butterfat, going down, and then, we got to make the protein now. Well, when the orders first put together and we started this multiple component pricing, the first, 12 or so years, the protein was the big component to produce for, butterfat, oh, butter is terrible. We don't want butter. Then the story, as you all know, butter's fine again. And, we found that this is a good, good for us, and companies from McDonald's to whoever started, switching out of, different products. And then butter was back, and, butter was leading things. And, but now, again, we've seen this movement now, protein, consumers, they can't get enough of it, different products, we're exploring products, there's a lot of innovation for these different products. And now that's driving it. So, farms, ultimately, historically, they do a fascinating job responding to these things, to me anyway. And, that's gonna be.
Butterfat's easier. It's easier to bump the butterfat than it is the protein. But I think, provided somebody's offering a premium to get those two more in alignment, I think. The fat and the protein, not such a big gap. And I know with all our cabbage cheese plants, we're standardizing everything because we just can't make it, the damn cheese is too fat, it's too soft, it's not a soft cheese, it's actually a hard cheese. So all that, it's not a lot, I can't remember how many loads a week are going down to West Springfield of cream from those cheese plants, but it's real. And, genetically, we've been able to increase the fat, but not so much the protein, but there will be bulls that will come along, but that's not gonna happen overnight. It's not like feeding, so. But yeah, we'll figure it out. It might end up being more volume of milk coming in and, lowering the butterfat percent. Protein will stay the same. There'll be more pounds of milk and there'll be more pounds of protein because of it, but it's not gonna be percentage based, it's gonna be, because the market told us they'll take the milk, they just don't want the water. And we did it. And we paid dearly for that. And the Northeast market, there's other markets in the country, I understand, that are docking their producers a couple bucks a hundredweight because they can't handle the milk. So after we went through all that, I'm happy that they can enjoy it like we did. So anyway.
This is not necessarily a federal order issue, but I was going to also just to bring it up because I think it is an issue for us still. I might have brought it up in the last meeting, and anyone also talk to what I often hear, and the challenge is also transporting the milk as far as, number of drivers we have to get milk to where it's gonna go. And, you know, the fleet that we have to do that with, we're gonna get all this extra capacity and milk and gotta move it. But, you know, I'm hearing, you know, how much of a challenge do people see that as? And how are we gonna meet that? Do we think we're gonna be able to attract it? I mean, I know like, you know, one co-op in the DFA, one point, they, you know, now they have some of their own fleet, right?
Yeah, had to.
That was presumably,
It's that or nothing.
presumably, yes, you know, solving a problem that you had. But, I mean, I'm not tracking how much, you know, the size of the fleet in the Northeast and the number of drivers, but when I talk to folks, you know, that becomes an issue. And I know those who follow along, there's sometimes we've been asked to have like a dump milk policy. Can we put that on the order because it's this Northeast issue that we have and we share in that cost sometimes, depending on what the reason for it is. And some of it used to be years ago when we first started seeing that was, I don't have anywhere to, you know, there's nowhere to put it. And so, you know, it's this problem. More recently, I've even heard, well, there is a place that we used to send it if we can, but I can't get a truck to take it there. I can't get a driver, or at least I can't get them there and get them back while that truck's gone. I can't do this. Can anybody in the room speak to what they're facing on that front? I mean, and how is that gonna affect the cost to producers? Or what are they seeing on the, you know, as we move into a challenging price year too? Is this something we should be prepared for? What are we looking at with that?
It's not, with the little bit we deal with getting milk hauled, our milk into our plant. It's from Agrimark, but it's just, they have a hard time getting drivers, and the supplemental insurance you have to get for hauling a sloshy load of liquid fluid milk has just, it's insane how much that's gone up. And if there's trucks on the road, for every truck, there's 10 billboards with a couple of ambulance chasers talking about truck accidents. And some of the stuff that happens with a completely legitimate hauler behaving themselves, doing everything right, and somebody gets into their lane, fault the other driver, insurance still pays because it was a truck. And that whole thing, I know we had a meeting out in Syracuse where we had to talk about that and the different haulers, guy from DFA, Barry, whatever his name is, and a bunch of people and haulers that haul grain and just talking about insane stuff. And, you know, yeah, sure, trucks, you gotta know what you're doing to drive them, but on the other hand, unfortunately, that's how you gotta move stuff, not just milk. But yeah, that'll be a challenge, but, you know, I'm assuming that where the plants are, the throughway, I mean, I think I don't know if it'll be that bad, you know? I mean, no worse than it is now, but yeah, hauling milk is going up and up. Farmers pay for it, you know? So.
I know from the DFA perspective, Gina was on, she can talk about a little bit more in detail than I can, but I know on the DFA side, we're focusing a lot on like optimization and efficiencies because within the network that we have now, there's still a lot of inefficiency. So there definitely is a need for like more drivers overall, but we can be a little bit smarter with what we're doing also and help to kind of like spread that load a little bit. So that's something we're looking internally at because you can control that a little bit more. Some efforts as far as like hiring, like we've put some effort into hiring veterans and women and trying to hit like a different sort of like, you know, pool for the drivers themselves. That has done some degree of help, but yeah, I mean, that's a big one for us on our must-watch list.
Yeah, and I know hauling became an issue. You know, it was a fairly big plant that had an environmental issue, and there was, you know, Pennsylvania championed like, oh, we made changes or allowances to have different, you know, allow different trucks to get on those roads to move milk in a different direction. So even states, you know, it was Pennsylvania, but I don't know how some of those even play into what, you know, moving milk on the road, what's allowed even, let alone insured for, but, you know, so those can come into, so there's some costs there. I know several years ago, maybe 7, I think state of New Jersey was, I don't remember what the final outcome was, and they're trying to change the limits on those roads because there's a cost of milk going into New Jersey, you know, with the types of trucks that can go in there as well. So all this, you know, I'm just thinking of more milk, moving milk, and some of these costs are involved. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and I know for that purpose, that specific example with regard to Pennsylvania, it was a limited duration for that purpose.
Yes.
Yeah, but kind of looking at, right, what other items can be shipped over the road at what weight, I think is an interesting conversation to have.
Yeah, you go from state to state, and there's a different rule, and
Yep.
that's gonna force, that concern is a challenge, and that was a temporary allowance, but it highlighted the, that's right, sometimes you don't think about, there's a, well, if we're gonna move the milk there, it's gotta be on this truck or so forth.
All right, thanks. I wanted to see if, so part of the federal marketing order reform, well, actually, the major thing that probably drove it was make allowances, was updating make allowances for the first time in a long time. And then there was a lot of discussion, and part of the big bill that was passed back in May was to give USDA some money to look at doing a survey. And I wanted to see if Andy would be willing to talk, if he was able to talk a little bit about that and where they're at and what's going on with that, because that's going to probably be a different way of doing things going forward here.
Sure. Andy, you're unmuted, so go ahead.
Okay. So a couple things. First, Brian, I'm waiting for Waymo to start running butter trucks long haul. So we should be in pretty good shape with that before too long. In fact, we're actually not that far away from that, are we? I don't know about butter, but long haul autonomous vehicles is already a thing. Other thing that I'll throw in as a freebie is the conversation about, what are we going to do with all this milk fat absolutely throws me back 50 years to the earliest part of my career when butter was evil and everybody was, throwing it out in the streets and so happy to have it out of their house because it was just going to clog up grandma's arteries and everything else. And I'll never forget a conference that we had at Cornell where an economist from Land O'Lakes, a man who I respected very, very much. I thought he was one of the best dairy economists of his generation, literally and seriously said, the only way we're going to get rid of all the milk fat we're producing is if we pay people to eat butter. And I can remember laughing and saying, okay, look, Paul, the price is going to clear the market and it's going to be a positive price, not a negative one. And sure enough, it did. And, I think the deal that we're facing now isn't, can we imagine a solution, but more like how painful will that solution be to where we get things back in balance again. I would note, for example, our export data only goes through August at this point. But if you just look at those first 8 months of 2025 and compare them to the first 8 months of 2023 and 2024, our export tonnage of butter and butter fat-based products is up by a factor of 3. So we're already seeing a lot of this stuff being priced to sell in world markets. That's not a happy days are here again price, but it is a solution in the sense of finding a place where you can sell this stuff. Okay, so those are my, I couldn't wait to tell you comments. Well, now I'll try to talk a little bit about the survey. So first of all, I would remind folks, some of you know this, a lot of you probably don't, but although I'm retired from Cornell, I've been an employee of the U.S. Department of Agriculture for the last 3 years, working with the Agricultural Marketing Service and the office that oversees federal milk marketing orders, as well as a number of other things, grading and inspection and export certification, oversight of promotion programs, and a variety of things. And of course, most of that activity has been around federal orders and the recent changes that were made. The sort of the last shoe to drop on that whole process is the creation of a new mandated survey that USDA would conduct, which presumably would be similar to surveys that were done by third parties in the past, and which have been used in the past to help establish the make allowance component of the product price formulas. One of the things that was heard at the hearing, really by, I'm going to say everyone, don't hold me to that. There might have been a couple people that said otherwise, but basically everyone at the hearing said that the make allowances needed to be updated, that certainly over the last almost 15 years, there have been changes in what it costs to produce butter, cheese, non-fat dry milk, and dry whey. There was disagreement on just how much those make allowances should be changed, and not surprisingly. But there was a general, broad, can't imagine, broader agreement that they needed to be increased, and it was just a question of by how much. And of course, testimony was offered, and different folks testified this amount, that amount, another amount, and ultimately my USDA colleagues made the Solomonic decision and came out with something. One of the other things that was also basically unanimous at the hearing was it would be a better world if the U.S. Department of Agriculture had the authority to collect this data as opposed to a third-party system, and that participation would be mandatory, and that USDA would have the authority to audit the information that was submitted to ensure its integrity. So mandatory to make sure that you had a representative sample, something that wasn't, willy-nilly about who decided to volunteer, and audited to ensure the veracity and integrity of the data that were submitted. USDA basically said, hey, we do not have this authority now, but if Congress wants to give us that authority, we'll do our best. And so in the bill that we managed to pass earlier in the year, there's this massive bill with about 42 words that say, go do a survey. The language literally is extremely terse. It basically says, we're going to give you money, and with this money, you will survey all of the plants that contribute information to the weekly price report that ultimately results in the monthly prices that are used in the class 3 and 4 formulas. So the same plants that submit price information will be required to submit information on what it costs to produce those products in their plants. It says that USDA will have the authority to review the costs of all the products produced in those plants, which from an accounting standpoint, you really couldn't do otherwise. You have to look at the whole enchilada to figure out what any particular piece is. And it says that USDA must publish the results of this survey every 2 years. Period, the end. It doesn't say when the first report is due. It doesn't say what time frame the cost survey should be. I mean, it would, of course, is stupid, but if you say you could interpret, I want to know the cost of producing butter in your plant last week Thursday. The language of the authorization is unspecified in that regard. Once the first report is issued, whenever that might be, then you get into a 2-year cycle, but there's no date that says the first one is due by thus and such a time. The other thing that is true is that unlike the elaborate so-called formal rulemaking process that was required every time you want to amend a federal order, this particular program can be developed under what's called informal rulemaking, which is the normal way that the federal government propagates rules. The stuff that we do for federal order hearings is way abnormal. The more normal thing is called notice and comment, wherein an agency proposes a rule, explains why this rule exists, usually having to reference the legislative authority that allows them to do this, says this is what we think we want to do, and then invites people to provide comments. And not unlike what we saw with the federal order hearing, those comments are collected, USDA ponders those comments, and may make some subsequent changes or alterations to their proposed rule. ultimately issues a final rule, and then we're off to the races. I can't tell you when all of this process will be completed, but I can tell you the steps of the process. The bill has been passed, so the clock is ticking, and USDA is well aware of it. And so we're currently in an internal review phase where we're considering what we might do, how we might do it. It may sound easy to say, go survey plants. But if you actually start to think about that, and any of you who are involved in running your own business can think about what did you do to set up your own cost accounting system and how many changes did you make and blah, 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 can appreciate that this is not a simple question or a simple task. Part of that internal review process is also engaging with the plants or companies that will be subject to the review so that they're aware that they're party to that. I can't tell you those names, but they are the same ones who submit price report information. So that's confidential information, but we know from every price report at the back, it says there are so many entities that provided data for whey, and there are so many entities that provided data for cheese, and so on. And so we're talking about several score of plants, maybe 60, maybe 80 plants that will be submitting information. So not a huge number, but also not a trivial number. Once we completed the internal review process, we'll begin writing a rule, proposed rule. That, of course, has to go through various rounds of approval and inspection and consideration. I should also tell you that this is not entirely within the realm of the Agricultural Marketing Service. It's not even entirely within the realm of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. These rules have to be submitted upstream towards the White House for consideration by the Office of Management and Budget. That is not true for a federal order amendment process. The formal rulemaking supersedes that review. But in this case, that kind of be outside of USDA review must be part of the process. And that's, they get 90 days to do that. So that's out of our hands in terms of our ability to control how long that will take. Once that process is completed, the proposed rule will be announced. Comments will be invited from anybody who wants to share comments, as is true every time we do a federal order. Typically, you would have 60 days to provide those comments. Then USDA is going to have some time to read those comments and consider them properly and see if they're, oh yeah, good idea, or oh, we're not going to do that, or whatever it is that we might end up doing before a final rule is published. Obviously, once that final rule is published, then USDA will be able to notify the plants or companies that are required to respond and say, you are required to submit a report for this plant over this time period, and we will give you some period of time to do that. Could be a month, could be a couple months, could be 3 months, but give them some reasonable amount of time to do that. Once all that data are collected, then there is some processing that has to be done by us before we can say, here is a result. One thing I should make totally clear, and it's a little bit kind of fussy, but it's an important distinction. When we talk about what does it cost to produce butter, let's say, the metric that we're using is dollars per pound of butter. So what are the costs of labor, capital, all the things except milk that go into making butter expressed per pound of butter. Dollars of labor costs per pound of butter, dollars of capital costs per pound of butter. It's per pound of butter. We are not going to be asking companies to say, what was your cost of butter? We're not going to ask companies to say, you give us the number, so many cents per pound of butter that you think it costs you to produce butter. What we're going to be asking them for is expenditures and certain quantities. So we're going to say, how much did you spend for labor? How much did you spend for non-dairy ingredients, salt, for example, or coloring, or rennet, or what have you? How much did you spend on packaging? How much did you spend on all those things outside of milk itself that go into turning a pound of milk into whatever amount of cheese, butter, non-fat, dry milk, and so on? We'll be asking people to say, what quantity of dairy inputs did you buy? And of course, it isn't just milk that these companies buy. They buy cream and skim and anhydrous milk fat and milk protein concentrate and a whole palette of dairy ingredients that go into making whatever it is they're making. We'll also ask them, what is the quantity of products that you produced? And of course, that will be the 4 major products of butter, cheddar cheese, non-fat dry milk, and dry whey. But we're also going to have to know all the products that they made so they can do a proper assignment of costs, not just to butter, but to everything else that's in this plant. And trust me, this is not a short list of either dairy ingredients or dairy outputs. But in order to do a proper tracking of which costs go where, all of that will have to be collected. So this is a pretty massive undertaking, and it's also something that it's important to try to do is in as standard a way as possible. Again, those of you who are involved in the management of companies, and I'm sure most of you, just as general knowledge, understand that every company does cost accounting. That's a given. But you're hard pressed to find 2 companies that do cost accounting exactly the same way. So if I say, what's your cost of labor? I could get 5 different answers from 4 different plants as to how, in fact, they measured that. And if I say, well, how much of that labor was used for butter versus anhydrous milk fat versus cream solids that were shipped to another company, blah, 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 their allocation of those costs could be quite different. And so we have to live with the fact that the cost accounting systems of each company will be bespoke, will be designed for their own particular needs, will be as granular or ungranular as they need. And so part of the challenge in putting together a rule is to figure out a way to minimize the differences. You can't make them all the same. That's a given. But to try to understand where those differences might be and then to minimize them when we do our own calculation of what the cost of producing butter is from the expenditure and quantity data that we collect from these various firms. I share that detail with you to try to persuade you that this is not a super simple deal, and it's going to require some very, very careful thought and planning, which has already begun. This is a sort of also a prelude to saying, don't hold your breath for the first report. I can't tell you when that's going to be, but one thing I can share with you is the last time that we had something that was along these lines was when USDA did the price survey announcement, the thing that moves the class 3 and class 4 prices by looking at changes in the butter price, cheese price, powder price, and whey price. And just to give you kind of some benchmarks on that, the legislation that authorized that price collection, that authorized it, was signed on the 27th of September 2010. On the 10th of June in 2011, USDA published a proposed rule that created this price report. Comments on the proposed rule were due on the 9th of August. On the 15th of February in 2012, the final rule was published, and the first weekly price report was for prices during the week of the 19th of March 2012. So it was about 1.5 years between when Congress said, do the price survey, and when we had the first data collected. And that was for an infinitely simpler survey than what we're looking at now. So that gives you some sense of it. John and Steve are, I think, still on the call. They've been involved in some of this process within the Northeast order. I've been part of the internal review team that's been looking throughout the country and made visits with my USCA colleagues. Some of this stuff is still in working stage and we really can't discuss too much, but if you have questions, Steve or John or I will see if we can provide you some answers.
Look, I have a question. How in the world are you going to account for property, plant, and equipment in that? Because when a lot of bomb throwers bitch about the make allowance, I say, well, build yourself a freaking dairy plant and make money, go for it. You know, and to me, the PPE part of it, that's, 30-year money. And you may have a plant that's on its last legs and versus you just built a brand new plant, state of the art. Do you guys have any idea how you're going to account for that? Because that's fairly significant. The actual plant.
So probably the two most difficult cost categories from an accounting standpoint are energy and capital, which of course was what you were referring to, the second one. Energy is difficult because a lot of plants only have 1 meter on their entire plant. And if they have more than 1 meter, it's often the case that there's a meter with the old plant, and then there's another meter with the new addition that we did in 2013, and maybe there's another meter for some warehouse. And so if they have multiple meters, that's sort of great, but it doesn't really actually tell you how much energy did I use in the dryer, or how much energy did I use in the churn, or how much energy did I use in the vat. So allocating energy costs turns out to be a tricky one. And of course, energy is gigantic. It's not one you can afford to be too willy-nilly about. The other one that's certainly a challenge is capital costs. And there's a couple of those. One, of course, is interest, which is more of a financial cost. But the bigger one, which I think Jim is very mindful of, is depreciation. And depreciation is another one of those accounting categories that everybody, even an economist, knows what depreciation is. We all know that depreciation is a real thing and that it's an important element, a huge element for many plants in terms of cost. But it's also one of those things that if you gave 5 different companies the exact same plant with the exact same equipment, purchased on the exact same day at the exact same price, my guess, and I posed this to a number of accountants who shook their head and sadly agreed, you'd probably have 5 different depreciation schedules. So again, this is really something that we at USDA have to be aware of and have to try to control for as much as we can. But at the end of the day, we're going to probably have to accept that there will be some differences that we simply can't control for. Having said that, it is absolutely the case that we will do our best to come up with a measure that recognizes the usage of capital through depreciation as a way of getting at that. I'm looking across my screen towards Chris Wolf, who can talk for a whole semester on depreciation, and I pretty much exhausted everything I know about it. So I'll leave it at that.
Some other time, Jim.
That's all right. I don't need. I'm just saying it's really. If anybody thinks it's going to be simple, but it still end up at the end will be better than anything we've ever had before, right, Andy?
That's what everybody wanted, and that's certainly our goal.
Good. Okay.
Great. Thanks, Andy.
So, I think based on the agenda, I know we're running a little bit late, so why don't we go ahead and just cut the break down by about 5 minutes, if that's okay. So we'll ask everybody to join us back here at 2:40 for our next conversation.
Just
Thank
in time.
that milk calories don't count. We have lots of really good milk calories over here, so please take advantage of those. The more you drink, the less that Jim has to bring back. So, do it for Jim. So we're gonna jump right into the New York Sustainable Dairy State, and this is a conversation that we kind of already teed up a little bit unintentionally, but perfectly done. With regard to milk hauling, right? Talking through some of the challenges that we may have. So one of the things that we talked about previously is, how do we make sure that New York, we kind of ties all those together, right? We want to make sure that we are a sustainable dairy state. So we'll go ahead and get right off. For those that are on attending remotely, just drop a note in the comments just to make sure you can see the slides, and we'll make sure everyone gets a copy afterwards. Oh goodness, you're gonna think I can read it this far. So essentially, right,
Elizabeth's coming.
Talk about our highlights. Again, in New York State, we are number 5 for dairy production at 16.1 billion pounds a year. But for us, our focus is not necessarily that number 5. It's to make sure that we have a dairy state for the next generation and the generations after, right? How do we make sure that it is sustainable, that we have places for our dairy and our milk to go? So again, some of our main highlights that we know. Right, 330 million pounds of cream cheese. That was a new record, and we are now the leading state for cream cheese. I'm really tempted to get a cream cheese hat, like Wisconsin has the cheese hats. Cream cheese rectangle. And then also, right, it excelled at the cottage cheese, which we kind of chuckle. I know a lot of folks think, 10 years ago, who would have thought that for cottage cheese? Now, how many of us have it in our refrigerator? So very exciting there, along with yogurt, sour cream, and ricotta.
Number 1 in all of those?
We are. So I know cottage cheese and yogurt. So yes, I believe sour cream and ricotta as well. I'm looking at Heather. Yeah, cottage cheese. Yep. We also know about a record investment in dairy processing, and it just keeps coming, which is very exciting, right? We talk about Fairlife, Great Lakes, Chobani, Cayuga Milk Ingredients, Agrimark, and so many more. It's very hard to keep track of them all. But what this means, right, for New York State Dairy, as we talk about expansions, both as processors, but also as our dairy producers, what is it going to mean? Again, looking at the sustainability. So with that question, we wanted to hold a open forum discussion, right? Really talking about what the industry needs and supports to achieve the vision of our most sustainable dairy state here in New York, right? So as we look as a state at policies, at projects, what is it that the industry needs? Again, from both the producer and the processor level. Understanding what industry is considering so New York State can learn from it, right? What are you seeing as hurdles? Is there ways as a state for us to be able to alleviate some of those, flag those, work through some of those concerns? So we do have, as far as the format, some core topics to structure the discussion. Those core topics, we're going to talk about supply chain readiness. We'll go into the environmental sustainability and the natural resource management, infrastructure, workforce needs and development, and then market access and agribusiness support. So with that in mind, we'll start first with the supply chain readiness, or we can really kind of bounce around as items come to mind. But we did mention earlier with regard to the milk hauler, and when we were in Syracuse, I believe it was last year, right, talking with our haulers, what that looks like, not just from moving the milk, but also moving those inputs, right, that feed, what that looks like, and what hurdles we're facing. So I would like to open it up to the group to kind of really start maybe with supply chain, and then we can go from there. What do you need?
We've talked a lot about the need for workforce development, specifically in the area of truck drivers. I think there's some exciting opportunities to utilize different resources throughout the state, but it's kind of fragmented. Like BOCES adult education programs that are training CDL drivers, doing a great job locally, but being hard to know where they are and where those resources are and what support they need. So that's been a big discussion. We collaborate on a fairly regular meeting with New York Farm Bureau, New York Agribusiness and Feed Alliance, and Trucking Association of New York to try to talk through ideas and where support is needed, and I think that's a big one. I will also give a shout out for the Dairy Farm Modernization Grant Program. I think that's a really great investment from the governor and the Ag and Markets team to make sure farms are a little better prepared, modernized, have storage solutions, have transportation bottlenecks addressed. So looking forward to that coming out for another round and potentially continue on into the future.
Yes, next round coming, date TBD. But going on to the BOCES and talking kind of about the BOCES adult learners for those truck drivers, do you know if that's a statewide? Is that a specific BOCES program, or is that?
Some BOCES centers have it and others don't, and that was one thing we were trying to figure out if there was a list somewhere, and it doesn't seem like there is a comprehensive list of what options are out there. There's also some private entities that have training solutions as well, but it's hard as a farmer when you're not, your main business isn't trucking, but you maybe you have to have CDL drivers on your staff, and some farms haul their own milk and that type of thing. Same thing with feed entities. That's not their main business, but trucking is a big part of it. It's hard to know where to go to get those resources when there's not one comprehensive list out there.
So that's really good feedback, and something I would highlight, and I don't know if many folks around the table are aware. So one of the things that the department has been doing, we've done 2 tours so far, and I think we'll continue hopefully in the months and if not years to come, right, with regard to BOCES. So the department has teamed up with State Ed and looking with BOCES and bringing district superintendents out into the field, trying to challenge their definition of agriculture, right? It's no longer just somebody standing with a pitchfork out in a field. Really trying to show them the breadth of careers available in that sphere. So that's something we can certainly bring back to them and talk to them about. And that also couples really nicely with our Blue Ribbon panel, where we're looking at workforce development opportunities. Part of that, we're looking at defining the ecosystem of agriculture, and something we've mentioned is that hauler, right? And making sure that they know that this is a career, it is agriculture. How do we bring you in? So that's really good feedback, and we'll make sure to pass that along to State Ed as well.
Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? This is not a shy group, and I know that.
If there was any way to address the extra emphasis put on hauling companies of all kinds, from the ambulance chasers, to get it, I mean, it is insane, some of the stuff you hear, that trucks get, we had a guy with one of our straight trucks, very careful driver, and he was going across the bridge from Poughkeepsie to Highland, and a car sideswiped him. He was 3 feet past the line. He was definitely right in the travel lane, and a guy went by in the lane next to him, sideswiped him. And we told the insurance company we shouldn't be paying for this. And they ended up finally, they settled for like $500 or something, but it was a pain in the neck, and nobody got hurt. But our driver was totally, you know, GPS, he was putting along. He was doing everything right. And if there's any way in heck that, I mean, yeah, that sometimes trucks can cause horrific accidents, but, you know, a lot of especially CDL trained drivers, they have had the training to know how to handle those rigs. And the log books, and I think it's business, compared to how many trucks there were 30 years ago, I think the business is safer than it was then, you know, truck accidents and all that. But when I hear these crazy, you know, one guy has a tanker rollover, and nobody was hurt, but rolled a tanker over. This supplemental went from like 25,000. The new younger generation want to take the business over, starting with no records at all of anything traffic wise. He ended up $200,000 they wanted, and he didn't take the business over, and it folded. You know, so I think that's a big part of it for people that are owning trucking companies, and how you convince young people to drive the truck, and the whole work-life balance thing, to me, it just makes me sick, because part of life is work. But I think there's too many people who don't want to haul milk on a Christmas day, and, you know, whatever. But I mean, it just, I don't know how you can, but for sure, the impediments to some guy that wants to haul milk and wants to be in the trucking business, if some of that stuff could be regulated a little bit, it just, you know, I mean, it's crazy.
Katie, we do have a online comment from Doug. Doug, I just unmuted you, so you can go ahead.
Thank you. One of the things we found here on the farm is the time commitment that it takes to get a CDL license. It's many weeks of study and coursework and that sort of thing. We actually had 3 employees and my son go to, I think it was West Virginia last year for a week in order to get CDL license down there within a week's time frame. When you've got people that are fully employed, for them to take the coursework, even nightly over multiple months, it just really is hard to make it happen. Earlier, there was discussion about the impact of trucking on farmers, and I'll tell you, as a dairy farmer, our trucking cost has gone up significantly over the last 2-3 years, and I don't see any reason it's going to slow down. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. I think Emily, I saw your hand.
I don't want to cut that conversation off. I was just going to put it quick. I think, and something that was certainly not on my radar in my previous role at National Milk, but certainly has come to light in this role, has been a lot of the discussion around packaging and responsible packaging. And I know that it could fit in a lot of buckets, but I kind of put that in the product safety, food safety arena, in addition to kind of the delivery of goods. I think in particular, a lot of discussion around, is it 16, I'm going to get the number wrong. The EPR bill for us is something that we're watching very closely and kind of ready to take action on when and if it compels us as January rolls around, for a lot of different reasons. But I think because of the nature of how dairy operates and the food safety and food quality piece, the options that could be limited. And this isn't just unique to New York. I think we know that we're seeing this across the country. How we're going to operate with a perishable product with some of these legislations with the state by state patchwork is certainly top of mind for us. And yeah, just wanted to open that up in this discussion too. I'm sure it's a top of mind for a lot of people as well, but thought that maybe fit better here than in other places.
Yeah. So we hear the trucking thing a lot from all of our members. That's just an issue across the board, especially the cost related to having to get that CDL. I know that's not something the state regulates. I keep having to tell our members that like this was a federal change. It's horrible. And then along the lines of the EPR, I'm forgetting which co-op did it, but they got a grant to study packaging and how they could reduce the packaging on it. And they were able to get to, I think it was 30% post-consumer, but then at that point, which I believe the bill has 50, at that point you risk shelf life, food safety issues, and you're then going to increase food waste. So that was their concern, and things that we say when we have discussions on that bill. And also just to do that study, they had to get a grant. They would not be able to afford that otherwise. So just to figure out what can work is really expensive and not something that really agriculture can afford. So those are some of the issues with that.
Dr. Martin, is this something that your team has dived into at all or looked at as far as packaging?
We're definitely looking more on the food waste side of that equation, but I think it's a really interesting expansion that we could potentially integrate because, I have a couple of thoughts on the food safety, food quality side here, especially on increase on farm storage and what that potentially does to microbial load, enzymatic degradation, especially for extended shelf life products like an ESL fluid beverage or a yogurt. Enzymatic degradation is our biggest sort of potential quality issue, and we're holding milk for 3 days at the farm level. We might see some issues there. We might see some issues with free fatty acids, is Jim and I's favorite topic right now. And how we're handling that milk. So I think we need to take the conversation from total butter fat. That's really important and really interesting. Let's start, being a little more nuanced what type of butterfat, how does that butterfat perform in an extended shelf life product? How do we ensure that the quality of the finished product is not at, a risk of being affected by our farm practices where we're, getting these high levels of butterfat or even trying to increase the protein level. So, but yes, on the packaging, it's something we're touching on. I think we have other faculty at Cornell who are in that packaging realm and how to, piece all of those things together. So that was a note that I took to take that back to our food science faculty.
Any other thoughts on packaging before we move on?
I got dragged up to Harkham's office when they were doing that producer responsibility bill. And I told them that, when we have something as nutritious and perishable product as milk, that should be the last thing, because we really don't have any alternatives at this point to number one, number two plastics. We really don't, and carbons, which have a little layer of plastic. We don't have an alternative, and down the road we should be trying to think of something. But my thing is, when I was a kid and went to the hardware store, a box of pliers came to the hardware store. They had a pegboard, and they put a little tag on it, and they hung the pliers on the pegboard. You bought the pliers, you didn't buy an unopenable piece of plastic. They have you use a utility knife and hope to God you don't cut your hand off trying to open it up. And I told them, to me, those are the low-hanging fruit. And there's a tremendous amount of plastic waste involved in non-food products. And let's get after that first, and then go into the food world,
Need a diversion, that's really good, Jim.
And well, as a vegetable grower, a head of lettuce, does it really need to be wrapped in a lot of cellophane? Or you just peel the outer layers off and, like you used to do? I mean, I just think there's a lot of places before we do away with, and I hate it as much, God knows, I hate seeing those trailer truck loads of milk jugs coming in. It makes me sick to my stomach, but we don't have an alternative. And how many grams of number one plastic, or number two, per volume of milk? I mean, that's the thing. But it's, I just think there's other places that we gotta pick on it first before we pick on food products. And that's what I told them, so anyway.
I think our concern is legislation gonna go faster than innovation,
Right.
right? I think there is a willingness to innovate as long as there's the appropriate timelines for.
There's no history of that anymore. Whatsoever.
Well, yeah.
Switching gears a little bit, and this may be more on the producer side, but I'm really interested because I know right now in New York State, it seems like you can't really drive through a community and not see a new barn go up, right? And we talked about the on-farm modernization storage, right? New infrastructure. So I'm interested in hearing if there are any concerns or areas where maybe more focus needs to be paid attention to, or hurdles that we're having with regard to expansions on dairy farms. I'm looking to you, Allison, first.
A few things come to mind. Definitely making sure that farmland stays as farmland, and there's a lot of competing uses for farmland, so we'd like to see that stay in food production as much as possible. And then I think one thing that we're looking at and trying to help our members make sure that they're growing in a responsible and environmentally conscious way, and having time to plan where is that feed going to come from for more cows, how is manure going to be handled in an environmentally friendly way that prioritizes water quality. So one thing that is pushing farms to invest is the investment tax credit, which has really spurred investment along with the exciting announcements of processing capacity. But we're starting to look at the timeline coming up for that. So end of 2027, project needs to be in operation in order to meet the current timeline. So right now it's really, we're kind of past the time that a project could be responsibly planned and executed for major investments. So we think that getting that extended in advance would be really helpful for farms, lenders, vendors, construction crews to be able to plan ahead for what that looks like and take their time to do the research, do the due diligence before the project breaks ground.
Thank you.
Katie, I do see that Jody from upstate Niagara has a comment. Jody, go ahead.
Hi, Antonia. Thank you. I guess I actually kind of wanted to go back. And apologies, because it's kind of hard to figure out how to get people's attention from abroad, or not abroad, afar.
It's almost the same thing.
To follow up on Emily's comment on extended producer responsibility, we share a lot of her concerns around food safety and packaging, and really to that whole supply chain readiness aspect of it. I think right before we shifted over to kind of land issues, she mentioned that the legislation may outpace innovation. I think that's a concern we share, and we would be concerned about legislating goals and putting hard, fast, steadfast goals into the legislation. It speaks to that ability of industry to meet those demands and what's the right thing first and foremost from a food safety and food handling standpoint, but also just from what's actually available. And I've heard scenarios where you can actually take, once you get to a point you put so much post-consumer product into packaging, you actually end up requiring more virgin plastics to help provide the structural integrity that's necessary in some of those products. And so we want to make sure that the legislation doesn't impact and have maybe a negative consequence that wouldn't have been anticipated. But we certainly recognize that these are popping up across the country. It's been on the radar for New York for a while, but just wanted to support Emily's comments on that regard. And since I have the floor and we were talking about land, certainly have some growing concerns. We're going through kind of our annual member survey process. And some of my most telling questions in the survey is just an open answer. What's going to impact your ability to grow, to thrive in New York? And there's several that you would consider to be obvious choices, but in more recent years, I think there's been interesting comments around land, access to land, not just for growth to meet future demand, but pressure on the current land base from solar and other renewables. And so that's kind of increasing on our radar here in more recent moments. But also the second one that pops up that I find to be a bit of a surprise sometimes is access to water. When you get into rural communities to grow and make milk production, it certainly takes a lot of water to be able to support the cows and the infrastructure there. So just disparate municipal water systems versus those who have wells, and what the ability of those wells to thrive are can be a factor for dairies in our area. And then the third one that has been popping up more recently, kind of jumping ahead probably on some of the options, but since I have my hand up and I'm talking, I'll go ahead and throw it out there. Is access to three-phase power in specific. And so our ability to ensure high quality milk starts with the ability of farmers to be able to cool that milk. And the cost of getting three-phase electricity to farms is 100% a barrier to being able to implement that technology. Certainly want to thank the department and the state for the farm modernization grants that have been going out there. They've certainly been helpful in providing funding for chilling and cooling, in addition to farm storage for when we have weather events and other things. But the three-phase power problem in rural Western New York is a problem, and one that we probably need to try to work towards figuring out. So with that, I might pop in again as the discussion comes about, but those are a few things that pop up in addition to the obvious ones, such as labor and regulatory concerns. So thank you.
If I can ask a follow-up question on the three-phase power, is it the timing to get the three-phase power on site? Is it the cost? Is it actually just, can you connect into that three-phase power? Is it kind of a combination of all three?
I'd say it's yes to all of the above. Whether three-phase is actually in an area near the farm, it would be the first part. If it's not near the farm, how long would it take to get it near the farm, and what's the cost of doing that? We've actually had farms that it's more advantageous to use generators to run their facilities and make their own power versus trying to pay to get the 3-phase necessary to run these modern parlor systems at scale.
I would say that's consistent with
Farmers may be more aware than I am on some of those things, so I feel free to add or disagree.
Yeah, that's consistent on the Western New York side of what we've collectively heard. Sure.
Now, another similar concern, and we have it, I think, on here, and I just want to confirm that if this is in fact correct. One of the things I've heard is also in regards to broadband internet, right? So a lot of our dairy farms, they are modernizing, and a lot more technology relies on internet access and whether you can even get that access, not only to, the office on site, but in the barn directly. Is that a concern that you're hearing as well? I see head nods. Okay.
For me, that brings up another point. One of the places I've heard a lot about that is Cornell University's Ruminant Center, where they do research because they're trying to research a lot of different technologies that need that connectivity. So tie in there, but brings to mind that research is vitally important. Some of the processing, increased processing capacity will be filled by growth, but some of it can also be filled by modernization of farms, better. Genetics are improving incredibly quickly in dairy cows, and so our feeding needs to improve and research there to feed the cows the best we can, to get the best components that we can get in addition to volume. So some of that growth in milk production in the state can come from improvements on farm, which need to be tested at Cornell or other minor institute research facilities. It can't be initially tested on family farms where the family's livelihood depends upon that business. So I can't speak highly enough of the team we have across the state that does research and extension. They are part of the reason why New York is so successful in dairy, but we need to continue to invest in them, in the people, and in the work that they're doing.
If I can just add, I just had this conversation last night. It's calf care, it's udder health, it's nutrition, it's breeding, it's facilities. There's so many ways that we can capture more milk from the herds that we have. And it's very, it needs to be targeted toward different types of farms. What's gonna work well on Jim's farm is not gonna work well on a Sunnyside in Cayuga County, right? So we have to be looking at the diversity of the portfolios of farms that we have here in New York State and saying, where can we help these folks to gain efficiencies in milk production as opposed to just add more cows? But I think that's a huge opportunity.
More milk per unit is sustainable. That's basically it. I mean, if you can get more milk out of one cow, yeah.
We have a couple of online comments in the queue. Doug, you're up first.
Thank you. I would speak in support of, more basic research through, like Cornell and that sort of thing. There's an awful lot of regulation that's coming at us regarding specifically greenhouse gas reporting. It's just been announced that we're going to have to be doing that. And I don't believe that's a mature science as to how that's all going to be measured and that sort of thing with the variability on farms and all of that. So I think that's another big concern to me is additional reporting. We already have to report water withdrawals and a number of other things besides our CAFO plans, and the administrative burden of all of these reporting to the state is getting extensive on farms. Thank you.
Some of that was just added with the new greenhouse gas, which according to Cornell, Pro Dairy, the guidance is not great. It's very confusing, and it actually seems that with there's a CAFO, the CAFO is brought into it, where like if you have a CAFO permit, you're not gonna have to do as much reporting, but if you're a smaller farm, you're actually gonna have to report more, which didn't make sense. So, and that reporting is also not clear about what exactly they're looking for, and that just came out. So we're still trying to fully process that, but that's the initial brush.
Yeah, I think definitely challenges with understanding applicability, like the biggest hurdle is figuring out if you need to report.
And
then once you do report, it kind of seemed like they weren't really asking for the best things to get at a greenhouse gas emissions estimate.
Shades of the water reporting rule, really. Seems like kind of the same thinking. Let's first of all find out what you're doing. And think about what that means.
We also have Jody in the queue. Go ahead, Jody.
Hi, I was just adding that in addition to Katie, your comment around broadband, certainly share that concern, but also just wanted to note cellular service in rural areas as the industry, particularly dairy, continues to move towards that greater use of technology from everything from paperless manifest and kind of AI and on the farm. When there is a lack of broadband, there can be a backstop of cellular service in many cases. However, that is not uniform across the state either. And so certainly experienced some interesting challenges from our move to paperless manifest as a result of that. So just wanted to note that as well.
Thank you. I want to switch gears a little bit and go into workforce, because I know this is a topic that we've talked about in just about every meeting, the last couple of meetings. But, you know, we've talked about haulers and really kind of looking at the transportation side of things. But I'm also really curious from your perspective, if there's one particular segment that if we focus on workforce, you know, if we had one area we had to focus on workforce today, what would that be and why?
All of them?
All of the above, so not gonna answer.
I can't answer.
Top three.
I from the farmer's perspective, I do think they need workforce that's going to be there doing the day-to-day tasks of milking, feeding, picking, harvesting, like depending on what kind of farm you're talking about, that that kind of work to get the job done is really important. But we're seeing struggles with filling cropping side roles. It's harder to gain experience there because you do things once a year instead of doing it every single day of the year. So trying to get the crop team and the crop leadership in place on the dairy farm has been a challenge. And then I mean, it's literally so hard to answer your question because every support service that's out there, veterinarians, ag engineers, truck drivers, agronomists, all of those things are needed, and kind of seeing where the future goes of the aging workforce of farms and all of the service providers, where are those future leaders going to come from?
I guess, yeah, tied in with that is immigration. And the back door's closed, the side door's now closed, and now the front doors are closed. So as a processor, that impacts us because of the refugee admissions program that is basically shut down for now, has served as a wonderful source of colleagues for us here and elsewhere, but it's existential on many of the larger farms. And DFA as CEO has been fabulous on this, but the recognition that that's a very big deal, and we're not going to get any relief that we've wanted for decades on the federal side anytime soon, is the unfortunate reality. So that is very scary. And I've followed a few of the stories, but, the chilling effect of a raid on one farm will have repercussions in a big way. So less to your point, Kitty, of what can we do? I get that, but we can't have any without bringing it up.
There are a lot of conversations going on federally, and Ashley can speak to the details more than I can, about revamping the H-2A program. The momentum they feel is that if it's going to be done, it's going to be done now. And any pressure that can be put on, I don't know if you can talk with the other commissioners around the country the next time you all meet, that if it can be done, I know it would really help the dairy farmers. If they would be able to have better access to that program, go a long way for them, but just revamping the program generally would help farmers.
Seasonal includes 52 weeks out of the year.
Right, they're looking for year round, that's the ask.
It's already happening. I think we'll get it actually.
Yeah, I think we're very well poised, and it's like, you just gotta get it over the finish line. Just like Home for Healthy Kids, like, we're just gonna keep laying them up.
So we're still seeing a lot in our workforce programming of, on the sort of dairy processing side, a lot of requests for our high school boot camp program. So we have a ton of high schools reaching out. They want to expose students to the careers that are already available, that will increase in the coming years. We're challenged by personnel in our own team, being able to get folks out to do those kind of exposure events. And what we're hearing from processors is still, they don't have enough qualified people. And qualifications are really, really important. We just, worked with a facility that the folks in their lab really, were not trained well enough to recognize when some of the procedures that were being done by a third-party lab were not doing what they thought they were doing. And so they were spending a lot of money on tests that were giving them results that were not accurate. And so, we need people in these facilities, but we need people who are trained and who have the knowledge to, do the job well, keep the food safe, and not waste a ton of money. So, I think it's still such a huge problem.
Is there a particular barrier you find with finding qualified workers? Is it the availability of training? Is it just part of the hiring process? Is there one?
So this is a very company to company specific issue, right? So number one, it is just awareness. General job seekers are not aware that dairy processing is a job that they can go into. They don't know what that entails. What does that look like? What do I have to do? The awareness is absolutely an issue. As far as the training, I think that part of it is just lack of qualified people, right? And so when you lack qualified people, your decision is, well, I hire somebody who I can try to train on the job, right? Or I don't hire anybody, and obviously the solution is you hire somebody. And so, at that point, it's what kind of systems do you have in place in that facility to train those people? And a lot of times, those aren't fantastic systems. Sometimes they are fantastic systems, but more often than not, I think it's not giving that individual the empowerment to make good decisions. So, so I think there are many, many layers of barriers there in my mind, especially when you're just trying to fill slots.
Our experience has been when we get a promising young person in there that wants to learn and do a good job, we can send them out to food science and put them through HDSD course or yogurt course or whatever. And, they're definitely not, they're not going for a 2-year education or 4-year education, but to learn to have enough science ability to understand how everything works, and getting some short courses in. It seems to be very helpful. You know, we've got some really good young people that we've hired. God knows we've been through enough people that came in and, yeah, they just weren't gonna work out for any job, let alone what we wanted. But I think just having Cornell have the money to be able to do these trainings for different things, kind of more like a vocational thing than it is really a higher education thing. But our head of quality at our place is 24, went to Cobblestone for 2 years, but she's taking courses out there. Very conscientious. We got a 99.7 on our third-party audit last year. It goes up every year, but SOPs for everything, and just, it doesn't take an Einstein genius. It's somebody with a work ethic and a brain, and you can, these courses, you can get them up to speed, for working in the plant. Of course, with all the regulatory stuff, we've got 3 people now that are trained, have a license to receive milk. We're gonna get a 4th one, just so we're very flexible and nobody has to be in there every Sunday afternoon or whatever. But, I think that's a big part of it on the processing side. And then, on the farm side, if you've got immigrant folks that wanna work hard, they should not be scared to death of the Iceman. I always thought the Iceman cometh was a good play, but now it's a nightmare that every farmer lives through. Not me, because mine helps indigenous, but I just think that it would be great if people want to come here and work, they can come here and work and not be scared. And that's just a sign of the times, but it's been too many years that this is 30 years now I've been trying to get this damn immigration thing fixed, and it comes up and then a few bad apples ruin it, So, but that's critical, is people, if they want to work, we gotta let them work.
I'll have one thing that's a little bit more towards Allison's comment about like the workforce that's needed to support farmers just in general and in agriculture more broadly. And something that we've been thinking about a little bit is there's a lot of ex-farm kids out there that leave ag entirely. and it leaves kind of this dearth of people that have any idea of what we're doing, right? And so is there some support that we can provide to people like to better equip ag universities and things like that about what all the variety of jobs that are available in agriculture are, right? It's more than just working in a plant, although that's really important, but there's a lot more to it than that to keep the whole industry working. So resources and thinking about how to kind of find that pipeline of the next generation people, I think is helpful.
Yeah, and with that, I think, Antonia, if you don't mind kind of walking through maybe, I think we touched on it before, but maybe kind of giving folks a reminder about the work of the Blue Ribbon Panel, because I think that will kind of nicely sum up some of the conversation and leave a little bit of hope, hopefully, with everyone as we.
Absolutely. Christine, as you were sharing your comment, I'm sitting there like, yes. Because our Blue Ribbon Panel, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with it, so this might be for others as well. Our Blue Ribbon Panel was an initiative announced by Governor Hochul last fall, following the first ever youth agriculture conference in downtown Albany that brought together FFA, 4-H, Manners, our higher education institutions to come together to talk about youth ag education, but also how does that help our pipelines for workforce, right? So the panel has met several times this year, working in different subgroups, because the deliverable, by the request of the governor, is to create a report that will deliver to the governor and the legislature that outlines recommendations to advance youth ag education and workforce development in New York State. And loud and clear, we've heard from our panel members exactly what you said, that if you don't have any familiarity with ag, you would have a preconceived notion in your head about what that work looks like, what that work pays, and a lot of those perceptions are inaccurate. So one of the takeaways, one of the recommendations we are developing is how do we equip educators, right? From the guidance counselors, from your middle school teachers, all the way up to higher education and CTE programs on what it looks like to get a job in agriculture. And you don't necessarily have to be out on the farm. We also need vet techs, right? We also need truck drivers. We need all these people that can form this ecosystem that we need to rely on. So 100% absolutely. And if you or anybody are interested in participating in those conversations, please reach out to me because those conversations are ongoing.
So I want to leave with a little bit of hope. So I think we may hit pause here, but certainly, you know, as you leave today, right, or sign off from our WebEx, you know, certainly give some thought to this and feel free to raise ideas if you have them, right? We again are looking to be the most sustainable dairy state in the country, and for that, right, we talked about broadband, we talked about cellular, you know. What is it that we can do to further support the producers and processors to make sure that we can have generations after us still in this wonderful industry? Before we open it up for any for the public comment period or closing remarks, I will turn it over to the commissioner if he has any final thoughts.
Oh, yeah. I don't think you want them all right now because there's a lot of you know, with the last subject, I'm really dangerous on that subject, but these two are especially dangerous on that subject. Boy, if you ever want a shot of hope when you need one, sit in on one of those blue ribbon discussions because the energy there is unbelievable. We'll get there, but I think the challenge we have is that is at its very best, and it's at its very best. It's an installment program. Because we're reaching down into K through 12. We're getting high school kids, we're getting college kids. We're going to do a nice job when we get into Cornell and get SUNY systems. But that pipeline's got to grow, and that's going to take 10 or 12 years before we, you know, accomplish those goals. But yeah, the fastest growing FFA state in the country is us. 4-H right on its heels. Ag in the classroom, growing like a house of fire. Manner students growing. So that is where hope can be found. But I think, you know, well, a couple of fun things today. My morning was pretty great. Got to be a part of the state energy plan vote. It's been passed unanimously. This is a pretty logical, I would encourage you all to go look at it. Go look at the state energy plan. Because it's a very realistic look at three-phase power, the grid, where are we, what can we do? We can't electrify everything today if we wanted to. We're going to need our farms to create energy, to make electricity, to make renewable natural gas. So I think pretty great news coming out of the state energy plan today. A pretty realistic look at a snapshot, if you will, where New York is with regards to energy. So that was really positive. I think there's a lot of opportunities for our farms to make energy and take advantage of the needs that we have against climate goals. So conservation goals that are going to lead us in the right direction. So that was pretty great. So in that regard, and talking about hope, you know, we've been at national meetings a lot. It's meeting season. State commissioners are talking. We talk every week. And there's still headwinds and there's still a lot of fog in the nation's capital right now. But, you know, I told the governor this morning, I said, you know, it's foggy down there. It's really foggy. But coming back to New York, it's like, I can see where we're going. I can see where we've been. I know where we want to go. We've got decades of programming and policies and work at Cornell that's taking us in the right direction. We got to keep that going no matter what. So that's going to be a challenge for us, but the governor's right there. Somebody brought up the Dairy Modernization Act, you know, that was huge. You know, over 100 farms took advantage of that. And we got another round of it coming. So there's some hope right there. Saw the commissioner from state ed today, talked to her, she's all excited about it. They've been across the state, walked into BOCES, walked into some of the training opportunities that these guys are excited about, to see the light in state heads' eyes. Everybody's been at the table for a long time, except for state education. So this is new for them, but seeing the connections is, I think, pretty amazing. So I guess, you know, I could go on for a long time, but I think I like where we are in New York. With the other commissioners, they say, "You're going to leave any dairy manufacturing?" No. I think we're good here. So yeah, I have a lot of hope, and I think we've got the right ingredients. I think this is an example of the right ingredients. Look at the minds that are around this table here. You're all people that know what's going on in the dairy industry, agriculture. I think the idea of being the most sustainable state is the right thinking. Every now and then someone from the governor's office says, "Can we get back to number 3?" And it's like, that's the last thing on my mind.
Being profitable at number 5.
Yeah.
I settle for that.
You know, I really don't care about that. I mean, do we want to add 130,000 cow dairies so we can keep up with Minnesota or something? I don't think so. I think we got good resources, we got the knowledge, we got the marketplace. We can be the most sustainable. We don't need to be the biggest. We just need to be the best. I think it was kind of fun to think about being a part of that, having you guys engaged in this discussion. So I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Yeah, much appreciated.
So I know we'll open it up for public comment.
Yep, so anyone virtually, public comment period for the last 15 minutes of this meeting, feel free to raise your hand. Open up to anybody in the room here as well if you want to share any final words before we end today.
I would just echo your comment about, or I guess give 2 thumbs up to your comment about the fastest growing FFA state. They didn't have FFA in my high school when I was growing up. I feel like I missed out in a big way. I don't know, I mean, I'm sure most of you around the room are familiar with the program. Some of you maybe were in part of it. But the way I describe it to other people is I say, just when you think the world's going to hell, and the next generation is terrible, you meet some of these kids and they just reaffirm your faith in the future. It's such a great program, whether they pursue an ag career or not. Like it's more than just ag awareness. It's like leadership. It's public speaking. It's like everything. And I'm just so impressed every time I do anything with FFA by the kids. They're just amazing. I probably would have got thrown out of it.
Well, it's great you say that, but you go to the national meeting, you go to the state meetings, and the quality of student, you know, Jim, you were talking about, we need people that just know how to work. We can teach them the skills they need. But you go there, and of course, Katie's responsibilities are dairy and food safety. They have workshops and competitions around food safety, and she's like, I want to hire this kid who's a junior in high school because they know more than people that come in and apply for jobs in food safety here. You know, these are high school kids. They're competitive. They do their homework. It's pretty wonderful to watch, and that's not, I mean, I don't know how many competitions are, but they're like 40 or 50 competitions.
And they're always looking for judges, so if you are interested, let me know and I will put you in touch with the right people.
Yeah, volunteer.
Thank you. We had state officers here a couple weeks ago. Something we're going to continue to do now. Just having had the opportunity to meet with the leadership in the youth organizations matters. 4-H. We bring them here and they sit around this table with all the division directors and hear what goes on at a division directors meeting. What's worrying the dairy team? What's worrying the animal ag team? What's worrying plant? What's going on? They sit there and go, oh my God, how many careers are there in agriculture because they're represented here. So we're going to keep doing that, cultivating that next generation. Again, hope. We've got, we added 104 chapters last year, and I think we've already got half a dozen more chapters this year. And 5 of them are in New York City.
Yeah.
Current president is from John Baum High School, which is in
No, it's great.
Dangerous.
I'm not used to good news at all.
Another piece of good news, the governor just yesterday announced some of the numbers and updates on universal school meals that were part of the budget that you guys were helpful with. That means more demand for not just dairy, but New York grown and certified in a big way, given the premium that is paid for local products in schools. But we're one of only 9 states that kids don't have school lunch debt. And that's just a huge thing. So the benefit of agriculture working well is that people are well fed and well nourished. And we get to see that in some of what she had to say yesterday.
Yeah. It's great.
Yep.
That's coming out soon.
We do have Ed raising his hand. Go ahead, Ed, you're unmuted now.
Thank you. Part of our efforts in sustainability should also be looking at food waste. I've got a son-in-law who owns 13 daycare centers. And he said the amount of food that is just plain wasted and thrown out is atrocious. And I'm sure I've heard the same story too in many of the schools. So that might be something that we want to take a peek at, not only in the school systems, but some of our senior living areas, to find out how much food is actually being consumed and how much food is just being passed across. Meets the criteria for what you need to have, but is not being consumed.
You can make energy with that.
Yeah, feed pigs.
Thank you.
Great
Thank you.
comment, thank you. With that, I will turn it back over to you, Chris.
All right, thanks. I just have one final thing to say that actually Allison and Nicole kind of jogged my memory. You guys may have noticed that Cornell was in the news a lot in not such a good way with the current administration. And the agreement that was reached between Cornell and the administration was to put $30 million into agricultural research. And so that would be both basic and applied, and it's going to be $10 million a year over each of the next 3 years. And the committee is to determine what the RFP is going to be and priorities is they're putting it together now, and so in next semester they'll release that. So that might be an opportunity for some partnerships and some research in this area for New York dairy too.
Absolutely.
We expect a lot of that to go towards dairy.
Well,
Personally, because it is.
I don't know.
State's
I'm going to be on the
largest
committee to write
agricultural.
that RFP, so.
Good.
And we might have some.
We got a guy.
I don't know if you're going to be on it, if not, but I'm going to be on the committee. So, it's not nothing, right? It's $30 million, so.
Yeah.
I would expect a lot of it to go to dairy.
I hate to be so stupid, but which administration are we talking about?
We're talking about the White House.
Okay,
Trump
good,
administration.
good. Yeah,
So
I
that was-
assume so, but I'm thinking.
Yeah, that was the deal was that there was
I
a
know,
hold up a lot of
yeah,
federal
yeah.
grants, and this was the deal to release then those federal grants.
And just to be clear, that $30 million is coming from Cornell
Yeah.
to fund
Oh, yeah. No,
research.
yeah, we didn't get it from the feds.
That's
That's,
Oh,
that's
I
the
see.
the provost, which is funny because they always seem to tell us that they're short on money, but they found this, so
Yeah.
it's good. It's good for what it's
So
going.
there is some good out of that disaster then.
Right.
Freed up $110 million.
Right.
In pause program.
The fact of the matter was, it wasn't worth fighting about it anymore at that point.
No,
It came
well,
down to-
Yeah, they went after a lot of top universities. and
yeah,
froze-
yeah,
froze
I know
all
all
the
that,
funding.
yes, yes, it's.
Like,
it was
and they
beautiful.
came up with each university to get out from under it made
A deal.
honestly some strange deals, like Harvard's was like to fund trade education.
Traded, okay.
Harvard, Brown, Columbia, there was a
They went after a bunch of, yeah.
But what's different is all of us are aware of how unique Cornell is. It's the only one of its kind in the
Yeah,
country.
I believe.
Nobody else gets that.
Land
That it's our land grant and it's an
Yeah.
Ivy League. So that education process has to happen over and over and over again. But it allows for something like this.
Well, in this case, the deal is that the money goes for agriculture.
Correct.
Ag research, both basic and applied.
That's a good thing.
Good.
Great. Thanks.
That's okay. Yeah, thank you.
Sounds great. Thank you everyone again for those that joined us remotely. Thank you for joining us. For those that made the trek here, thank you. And also thank you for the weather for holding out on us. It's great. Wish everyone a very wonderful end of 2025 and we will see everyone again in 2026.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep.